Everyone thought the car industry had already chosen its winner. Governments were pushing electric vehicles. Billion-dollar battery factories were being built across the world. Companies like Tesla and BYD were expanding faster than ever. And if you listened to the conversation online, it sounded like the future had already been decided. Batteries would replace engines, gas stations would slowly disappear, and any company that failed to go fully electric would eventually fall behind. But while the entire industry was racing in one direction, Honda quietly started moving in another dot. No flashy announcement, no dramatic launch event, no promise to change the world. Just a small team of engineers working on something most experts had already dismissed as outdated. And yet, when details of Honda's new system started spreading through the auto industry, something strange happened. Analysts stopped talking about horsepower and acceleration for a moment and started asking a different question. What if the future of cars doesn't belong entirely to EVs after all? And that question is making some of the biggest companies in the world very uncomfortable, because Honda didn't try to beat electric vehicles at being electric vehicles. Instead, it focused on the one thing millions of normal drivers still secretly worry about every day: dependence. Dependence on charging stations. Dependence on giant batteries. Dependence on infrastructure that still doesn't fully exist in huge parts of the world. And the strange part is, Honda saw this problem long before most people did. To understand why this matters, you have to go back decades before electric vehicles became a global obsession. Back to post-war Japan, where a man named Soichiro Honda was building tiny engines in a small workshop surrounded by a country trying to rebuild itself from destruction. He wasn't born into wealth. He wasn't a powerful industrialist. In fact, many people underestimated him, but he had one obsession from the very beginning. Machines should solve real problems for ordinary people. That idea became the foundation of Honda itself. At a time when most companies chased prestige, Honda focused on practicality: small motorcycles, affordable transportation, reliable engineering. While larger manufacturers competed to build bigger and more expensive machines, Honda kept asking a simpler question: what actually works for everyday life? And strangely enough, that mindset kept making Honda successful. When the oil crisis hit in the 1970s, Honda's fuel-efficient cars suddenly became essential. While competitors struggled, cars like the Civic and Accord exploded in popularity because they matched reality better than the market's assumptions did. That pattern repeated again and again. Honda rarely moved first, but when it moved, it usually moved differently. Which is exactly why what's happening now matters so much, because while the world became obsessed with batteries, charging speeds, and range numbers, Honda started noticing something nobody wanted to openly admit. The EV transition looked smooth in wealthy cities with charging networks and government incentives. But outside those environments, the picture looked very different. In many countries, charging stations were still rare. Apartment owners couldn't easily charge at home. Long-distance drivers worried constantly about battery range. And even people excited about EVs quietly feared one expensive problem above all else: battery replacement. That fear became larger the more people learned about electric vehicles. Because the battery isn't just one component in an EV. It's the heart of the entire system. If the battery weakens significantly after years of use, repair costs can become overwhelming, and Honda realized something dangerous. Most companies were treating these issues like temporary obstacles. The Honda started treating them like structural weaknesses. That changed everything. Instead of asking, how do we build the best EV? Honda asked a different question entirely. What if people want the experience of electric driving without fully depending on electric infrastructure? And this is where the story starts to get uncomfortable for the rest of the industry, because Honda's answer wasn't a traditional gasoline engine, and it wasn't a fully electric car. Either it was something sitting directly in the middle, a system designed to drive like an EV in daily life while avoiding many of the problems that still make millions of people hesitant to go fully electric. At first glance, Honda's new hybrid system sounds simple. The car often moves using electric power, especially in traffic and city driving. But unlike a fully electric vehicle, the engine quietly generates electricity in the background when needed. That changes the entire psychology of driving. No searching for chargers during long trips, No waiting an hour to continue a journey. No panic when battery range drops faster than expected in traffic, heat, or cold weather. And Honda made another decision that surprised engineers. Instead of using massive batteries, it focused on smaller, lighter systems working together intelligently. That meant less weight, lower cost, better balance, but more importantly, less dependence. And once people started understanding what Honda was really building, the reaction inside the industry became much bigger than anyone expected, because suddenly the conversation changed. For years, EV companies operated with one enormous advantage. Inevitability, consumers believed there was only one future left: massive investments, battery factories, charging infrastructure, government subsidies worth billions of dollars. But Honda introduced something dangerous into that narrative. An alternative. End markets become unpredictable the moment people feel they have options. Again, because now consumers started asking uncomfortable questions. If a vehicle can deliver quiet driving, strong fuel efficiency, lower emissions, and long-distance freedom without full charging dependence, why rush completely into EV? That question matters far more than most people realize, especially in places where EV infrastructure still struggles to keep up with reality. In cities like Tokyo, Los Angeles, or parts of Europe, EV adoption feels manageable. But outside major urban centers, the experience changes quickly. In many regions across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, reliable charging networks barely exist. Electricity itself can still be unstable in some areas, and Honda understands those markets better than almost anyone. Because unlike companies focused mainly on wealthy urban customers, Honda built its empire by selling reliable transportation to ordinary people across the world. That's why many analysts believe Honda isn't trying to win the luxury EV race at all. It may be targeting the much larger market. Underneath it, the billions of drivers who care less about technology trends and more about reliability, affordability, and freedom from inconvenience. And if that strategy works, it creates a serious problem for companies built entirely around batteries, because the biggest threat to EV companies may not be a better EV, it may be a technology that makes people feel they no longer need one urgently, and that fear is already spreading quietly through the industry. Makes this even more complicated is that Honda's timing may be perfect, because right as excitement around EVs reached its peak, cracks in the system started becoming harder to ignore. In several countries, governments quietly began reducing EV subsidies because the costs were becoming enormous. Some consumers who rushed into electric vehicles a few years ago started sharing frustrating experiences online. Long charging waits during holidays, expensive repairs, battery performance dropping faster in extreme temperatures, insurance costs rising. And for the first time in years, some buyers started hesitating before making the switch, not abandoning EVs completely, just hesitating. And hesitation is dangerous in an industry built on momentum. That's exactly why Honda's approach feels so disruptive. It arrives at the moment people are beginning to ask questions they were previously afraid to ask out loud. Questions like, are EVs truly practical for everyone right now? Will charging infrastructure actually expand fast enough? What happens when millions of batteries start aging at the same time? And perhaps the biggest question of all, did the auto industry move too quickly toward a single solution? Honda never openly attacks electric vehicles. In fact, the company is still investing in EV technology itself. But that's what makes this strategy so clever. Honda isn't positioning itself as anti-EV. It's positioning itself as realistic. And realism is powerful when hype starts colliding with everyday life, because for normal drivers, convenience usually matters more than ideology. Most people don't wake up thinking about carbon-neutral transportation systems. They think about getting to work, driving their kids to school, taking road trips without stress, owning a car that won't become financially terrifying after a few years. Honda understood that emotional reality better than many of its competitors did. That's why this engine isn't really about engineering alone. It's about trust. A fully electric future asks consumers to trust several things at once: that charging infrastructure will improve, that battery replacement costs will eventually fall, that electricity grids will remain stable, that governments will continue supporting the transition, and that battery technology itself will keep evolving fast, enough to solve today's limitations. Honda looked at all those assumptions and decided to build something that requires less trust from the consumer. That may sound small, but psychologically, it changes everything because people adopt technology faster when it feels safe.